to order. This meeting is being conducted pursuant to Governor Pritzker's Disaster Proclamation and Public Act 101-0640, which amends requirements of the Open Meetings Act due to the COVID-19 pandemic. Although remote attendance is an option for the Plan Commission, all board members are present at this time. At this time, can we please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay. Lori, can you take a roll call at this time?
Commissioner Gaskell.
Present.
Commissioner Lasciuto.
Present.
Commissioner Manny.
Present.
Commissioner Maniatis. Commissioner Shaw.
Present.
Commissioner Vargas.
Present.
Commissioner West.
Present.
Chairman Gray.
Present. Okay, a quorum is present. Staff, are there any communications at this time?
No, just obviously a little bit of change in the commissioners. So we have some new ones, some old new ones, and some new ones, as well as some commissioners that have left. So I just want to say thank you to them and welcome to the new ones.
Okay, yeah, and I'll take a moment to welcome back Ken Shaw, welcome to the commission Jennifer Vargas, and Greg Maniatis, who's not here today. And also I want to thank Commissioner Stephen Vick for his time for the past 4 years on the Plan Commission. But with that, we'll move on to the approval of the minutes. Before I ask for a motion, I do want to note that there is a typo in the minutes. Page 6, third to last paragraph, it should say findings of fact as proposed by village staff in the June 17th, 2021 staff report instead of June 3rd. So with that small correction, may I have a motion to approve the minutes of the June 17th, 2021 regularly scheduled Plan Commission meeting?
This is
So-
Commissioner West, so moved.
Do I hear a second?
Second.
Okay, motion made by Commissioner West, seconded by Commissioner Lasciuto. All those in favor of approving the June 17, 2021 minutes, say aye.
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 Opposed? Okay, motion is carried. We'll move on to item 1 for tonight's agenda. Item 1 is a combined workshop and public hearing to consider recommending the village board grant Randy Ludke, the property owner, a variation from section V.B, Schedule 2, the lot bulk regulations, to be smaller than the minimum permitted at 6303 175th Street in the R2 single-family zoning district. The variation will allow the subdivision of the property into 2 lots. Variations for existing principal structure setbacks and a final plat of subdivision will be considered for recommendation as well. Staff, could you please proceed with your presentation on the workshop portion?
Thanks, Chairman. As you noted, this is kind of being instigated by the petitioner looking to subdivide his lot into 2 parcels. And that kind of led to a variation for the lot sizes, as well as the other portions of this are really more cleaning up the variations that already exist with the existing house. So we do that with most variations. If they're here and they're altering something with the lot or the principal structure, we'll usually kind of run whatever's out there if it's a non-conforming situation through. So here's kind of overview on the PowerPoint of what he's looking to do, which is take his kind of fairly deep single-family lot and divide it into 2. If you look to the east of this property, it's fairly similar to his neighboring property on the other side of Highland Avenue that has 2 lots there. The zoning for this is R2, single-family residential. The lot itself is currently 27,438 square feet. and on the corner of 175th Street and Highland Avenue. The existing home on the lot was constructed around 1959 and then was annexed into the village in 1964. So this area, which is called Ridgeland Avenue Estate Subdivision, or some people call it the Highland area or Highland Subdivision, was originally subdivided and initially developed in the county. Portions of it have been annexed into the village, including some larger portions, but there are still, especially as you move south from this property, it gets a little more spotty, and some lots are in the village, some aren't. And they're kind of slowly coming in. We haven't had one in a while, but it's usually when they want to connect to water or sewer, then they'll annex into the village at that time. So fairly unique when you get these subdivisions that were developed in the county, because developed under a completely different zoning code, zoning subdivision. When they come in, we usually try and, or you guys, even Plan Commission, will identify, here's kind of the best zoning to kind of fit this. Out here, R2's just kind of been the closest thing, closest zoning to what this was kind of initially zoned as. But it is unique because it obviously won't fit exactly, and that leads to some of these non-conforming situations we'll get to here. Again, the property is zoned R2 and single-family home. That's the same to the west, to the east and to the south of this subject site. And then to the north of this is zoned ORI, which is the older Panduit site, which is now their innovation center, which has some innovation equipment and is essentially an office or light industrial use. Mostly internal to that building that's out there. And then also the new Freedom Pond, which is essentially the detention for the downtown area in those developments. On the screen is a picture of the existing property or the existing house that's there. So it's a single-family home, one story, a fairly heavily wooded screened site out there with a lot of trees. And that picture is from 175th Street. The first kind of request here is just the review of the plat of subdivision, so dividing it into two separate lots. They're proposing to take that rear and kind of make it a separate lot. If both lots would have met the zoning requirements, that's what's kind of called a by right subdivision, so it essentially meets all the zoning requirements lot-wise, and they would just be able to run this plat of subdivision to you guys in the village board. The zoning code's lot requirements, though, if you can't meet those, then you have to ask for variations and to be able to subdivide it. So the kind of main things you're looking at there are lot size. There's a minimum lot size and then a minimum lot width. And just to note, those change a little bit too if it's an interior lot or a corner lot. There's additional width and additional size for corner lots because they have two front yards. So when you guys look at corner fences or things like that, that'll come before you guys or the zoning board occasionally, that's where you're not really allowed to put a fence there, or on rare occasions you can do it. And then there's also no accessory structures or principal structures. So the additional width, the additional size that's there really kind of compensates for them having those two front yards. So that way they still have the same backyard area as the interior lots in the subdivision. With this one, there isn't that additional width, and that's because that additional width requirement didn't really come into the village's code really until the 1970s. I'm still not even sure it's in the Cook County code requirements, but the village kind of put it into our code in the 1970s, it looks like, because of that situation to add for kind of additional yard space on those corner lots. So that's really the part that's driving the variations, is that additional width requirement that really wasn't planned for in the subdivision. So the first open item is just a review of the plat overall. It has been reviewed by the village's planning staff and the village engineer in terms of the requirements for a plat of subdivision, and generally meets that. So the variations for lot one's size and width, so under discussion with staff, the petitioner, essentially the lot is 27,438 square feet. To meet the minimum requirements, they would need 29,250 square feet. So regardless of where you put that line, they would have needed a variance for either one lot or the other lot or both lots. So in our discussions with them, we really wanted to make sure the new lot that they're creating, that's going to be a vacant lot, met the minimum standards, because that's one that could be sold off. Someone new could build a house there, and we really wanted to make sure if they came in there, they weren't going to have reduced setbacks or some other request they'd have to come back before you guys for. So the line was kind of set there to make that kind of meet the minimum standards, and then what's left with the corner lot is there. That's where the petitioner lives currently, so he lives in that house, and so if we were going to take some space from anywhere, it was going to be from kind of the known situation where it has an existing home and the petitioner currently lives there. So the two variations for this come from the lot one, which is short a little over 1,832 square feet for this square foot of the lot size, and then around 14.76 feet for the lot width there. So that's our second open item, just to review the variations that are related to the actual lot width on that property. The second kind of set of variations are the existing home and lot variations, and that relates to lot one as well with that existing home. So again, these are all kind of existing there, but there's about 1/4 foot variation with the primary front yard. The secondary front yard is about 4.75 feet, and then the interior side yard's again about 1/4 foot. So fairly minor there for the primary front yard and the side yard. And then the secondary front yard is a little bit bigger. That's about 4.75 feet. But again, different zoning code. They kind of treated those secondary front yards a little bit differently at the county at that time. So, but all existing situations there developed under the county's previous zoning code. And that's kind of the other open item we have, is just to review those. And again, that's a little more cleanup. The one weird situation that kind of comes to that is when the developer of lot two comes in and builds a home, it could potentially be 4.75 feet back from the existing home that's out there on the corner. But they'll be a few hundred feet apart, so I don't think it'll be all that noticeable. Or look like it's set all that far back from that corner house that's existing there now on lot one. So that's it for the staff report, and let me know if you have any questions.
Okay, thanks, Dan. At this time, does the applicant have anything to add?
No, I am Randy Ledke. I live at this home on 6303 175th Street. The only thing that I always looked into with the variance for the Lot A, which is the one I currently reside on, is that if I did have the extra 15 feet of width times the length of the proposed plat, I would have more than enough square footage. And with being said about the setback and the was it 4.75?
Yeah.
4.75, the way the houses are set, there's a brush line that if it is for visual purposes, you would never even be able to tell. But that's all. Everything else, Daniel did a great job, so thank you.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Ludke. At this time, I'm going to ask if any of the commissioners have any comments or discussion on this matter. I'll begin with Frank Lusciuto, Commissioner Lusciuto.
I don't have any comments.
Okay. Commissioner West,
I don't have anything, thanks.
Commissioner Gaskell,
Nothing from me, thank you.
Commissioner Shaw.
Just a couple of quick questions. The property's been owned by the current owner since 2017?
Correct.
Okay. And it was annexed into the village in 64, I think. Is that right?
Yes,
And it wasn't previously subdivided, it was annexed as is, right?
correct, as that full lot. Yep.
Okay. Did you say engineering looked at it? I was looking at the topographical and just looking at the drainage of the proposed lot 2. So engineering looked at it from that perspective, because it looks like there's the elevation drops at the southeast of the lot 1 and most of lot 2 on the northwest side. And I believe there's a swale. But engineering looked at that, and that's not of concern?
Yeah, so they'll have to, when somebody comes in to build that lot, they'll have to come in with engineering, but it's a buildable lot, so
Okay.
it's
So
not
they've
flood,
confirmed
it's
it.
not floodplain, it's not
Okay, that's what I was looking
any
at.
major issues or anywhere where they would need kind of drainage easements or anything like that out there, so.
Just making sure we didn't take the floodplain.
Correct,
part
and
of
that's
the
one
lot.
thing I guess we do look at with these. Let's say lot 2 was entirely floodplain.
Right,
Even if it was a by right subdivision, we actually have language in our code that could say you can't subdivide out an entirely floodplain property because you really, it's kind of damaging to that lot. You'd never develop it.
Yeah,
So,
the
yes,
second
we looked at
sentence.
that. There's actually no floodplain on the property. And then, yes, when they come in to get the permit, they will have to engineer it in a way that it drains correctly. But that'll kind of happen when they build the house on it, hopefully.
If I could, that builder would just go through the normal.
Building permit process, yes. Yep.
and I think it was a pretty thorough staff report. And if I understood correctly, the aim in how you're subdividing it is the variances are going to be on lot 1 effectively, and lot 2, to the greatest extent possible, would not necessarily need any sort of variances. It would just be buildable, right?
Correct. Yep, it would meet all the minimum standards, so could somebody come in and ask for setback variances
Sure.
or something? Yes, but it meets the minimum standards, so I wouldn't, unless there was something grading wise or something that they could point to that was unique, they won't be able to say, well, I have such a small lot, I need setbacks or something like that. So it will meet all the minimum standards.
Okay, so I didn't have any further questions about this particular request here, but I had some questions when we get to the finding of fact.
Okay.
So I'll
Okay.
reserve for the other commissioners.
Okay. Commissioner Manny,
No comments from me.
Commissioner Vargas.
I went out to the property just to take a look so I could visually see what we were looking with, and I don't have any questions.
Okay, thank you. And I also am going to just reserve till the public hearing, but I don't have any further comments for this. With that, we will now proceed to the public hearing portion of tonight's meeting. May I have a motion to open the public hearing?
I make a motion.
Okay, do I hear a second?
Second?
Okay, motion made by Commissioner Gaskell, seconded by Commissioner Shaw. All those in favor in opening the public hearing, say aye.
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 Opposed? Okay, the motion is carried. I did receive verification of the public hearing notice being published in the local newspaper. Anyone wishing to speak on this matter will be sworn in to speak after the staff's presentation. So, staff, at this time, please proceed.
I have nothing else to add other than the workshop, but I do have the standards when we get to that point.
Okay, sure. Mr. Lutke, do you have anything else to add?
Nothing further. Thank you.
Okay. So now I'm going to go back to the commission. Ken, you said you had some comments, so we'll begin with you.
Okay.
Commissioner Shaw?
So just tracking through the standards, first off, I just want to state up front, so that my questions are not misinterpreted. My hesitation when I look at this as a whole relates more to what Dan referenced for the block south of 177th, I believe it is, where we still have quite a few unincorporated lots. And we also have a fair number of what I would call dividable lots at this point. So some of my questions and comments really are related to, I know we wouldn't necessarily be setting specific precedent with this one. Each one is taken on its own merits. But I'm interested in thinking about the larger picture as we move forward with that. So looking in the findings of fact as presented here, there is a couple points that I just wanted to make sure we're clear on. Whether or not, so for number 2, whether these represent unique circumstances. As I look at the lots in the rest of the area, I see that there's at least 3 or 4, just or 5 by first count, that are actually quite similar situation. So as we define unique, I'm not sure in this sense how we're defining unique. And with respect to number 3, now this is really more personal opinion, how I view it. It states that the smaller lots across Highland, I'm pretty familiar with the area, and I would say that everything east of Ridgeland is essentially its own neighborhood and has its own character, its own feel. And this relates to some of the other findings under number 4 with respect to whether it's injurious to other properties or improvements and wouldn't impair essentially the property values of neighboring properties. It could be argued, and given the fact that there's nobody else here to speak, I'm assuming no one's going to be making that argument. As I look at that neighborhood, it's a wooded area, it has kind of a different feel, a more unique feel than much of Tinley Park, which I'm assuming is one of the things that you like about the neighborhood. So it does have its own feel there. I would say, that's debatable as to whether subdividing it is improving the value of other properties or reducing it, depending on how somebody's looking at that. So I would say that's a little bit debatable. So another point, and this is kind of a general question for staff, but do we have what we would consider our minimum lot size for any of these other lots that might potentially be subdivided?
I don't think we drew a specific line. I think this one's like under a couple thousand square feet, but I think that's where you guys would be looking at the lot size in comparison to what the minimum is and making that decision if somebody came before you with a variation. So I think our kind of initial assumption was a couple thousand, that's reasonable, that's something you could ask for. If somebody was asking for 5,000, 6,000, I'm not exactly sure where that line would be because there isn't a long history of these. But it is unique that there has been a bunch of subdivisions out there that then became annexed into the village. So there is, some of it might be in comparison to those other lots. Some might be lot specific. But no, we don't have a specific line set right now that would kind of.
Okay, given the base zoning though, what we're looking at here kind of is in effect, kind of the minimum, right? Because when I look at it, there's actually quite a few lots in that area that are actually much smaller. And for me anyway, if I were looking at a smaller subdivision, I would be hesitant to be for that. So I would just say that I just wanted to see where.
And that's kind of the unit. I kind of wonder how they landed on R2. Sometimes some of it now is okay. Now the majority of it's R2. So anyone coming in, you're going to go, let's zone them R2. But could it have been in R3? So I think R2 was kind of, you have big lots, you have small lots, and they kind of pick something in between that. So in some ways, these variations function like you're almost creating its own little mini zoning district out there, because it falls somewhere between those two with lot sizes at least.
For me, a couple of the mitigating factors would be that it is on the corner, and not mid-block, and that there is a very similar subdivision right across the street, right across Highland. So that, to me, those are kind of mitigating factors there. So, all right,
Okay, those are your comments?
that's
Okay.
my comments. Thank you.
Commissioner Manny.
None for me.
Okay. Commissioner Vargas.
No.
Commissioner Gaskell.
No.
Commissioner West. Commissioner Lusciuto.
No comment.
Okay. Well, hearing some of the comments the commission members had said in the workshop as well as the public hearing, my comments are, as staff has mentioned in the report and here today, that subdivided lot, the second lot, it does conform, right? And so I think Commissioner Shaw was asking about in terms of minimum lot size. I know this one shows for the interior is 13,000 square feet. And given that this is the corner, I do think actually for the variation, the standard of variation, I do think it's a little bit unique in that 62 years ago, it was subdivided into that 100-foot width rather than it was retroactively given the standard when it was adopted for 115 width. So I do think you have to play with, unfortunately, the history of the parcel involved. So in terms of that history, even the lot being a corner, being in that subdivision, 14,417 square feet is still greater than that minimum of 13,000 for an interior lot. It comes a little shy. I do agree with that, but I do think it's not from the fault of the homeowner, the current homeowner who bought in 2017, I believe, Mr. Lutke said. So given that it was originally subdivided at that 100, or rather 110, I believe, width, the building already exists at that 100.24 width. The setbacks, I think, for open item 3, I think those are okay. You got a couple inches at most for the primary and the interior. For the secondary front yard, the 4.75, again, it's been there for a while, so it's not like this is something new. All you're doing is subdividing the property with the minimum in mind so that you can have Lot 2 have no variations. And I believe it was stated in the staff report, and some of the commissioners mentioned that there are smaller lots in that subdivision. So I do think it's, for something like this, I do think it'd be something reasonable for some of these variations, given the unique history of that site, the way it's been subdivided and then annexed to Tinley in the 70s. So it has some geometry you have to take in consideration that wasn't originally developed like that now. But those are my comments on that. Is there anyone else from the public wishing to speak on this item? Okay. With that, could I get a motion to close the public hearing at this time?
So moved.
Okay, do I have a second? Motion made by Commissioner Manny, seconded by Commissioner Gaskell. All those in favor of closing the public hearing? Say. And opposed? Okay, the motion is carried. Staff, could you please present the standards at this time?
Sure. The standards are in your packet, and they're on the screen right now, so I'll just summarize them for you guys. This is a single lot, but is similar to the existing development pattern of that overall neighborhood. And that was developed under a different jurisdiction, different zoning ordinance, that the principal structure setback are existing and reasonable based on the existing subdivision's development pattern, that if the property was subdivided and developed under a different jurisdiction, and zoning requirements, it would be permitted, and that, again, the lot width and size were kind of typical during that development. And that again, the existing requirements or existing setbacks are all existing on the site. Just a general overview there of the first three kind of state statute required standards. And then there's also the additional standards for your guys' consideration as well when you look at variations.
Okay, thanks, Dan. Now may I have a motion, motion number one regarding the variations for this item?
All motion.
Okay. Well, could you read it?
I'm sorry.
Commissioner West?
I make a motion to recommend that the village board grant the following variations from section BB Schedule 2, lot, yard, and bulk regulations to the petitioner Randy Ludke at the property located at 6303 175th Street in the R2 Single Family Residential Zoning District in accordance with the plan submitted and listed herein, and adopt findings of fact as proposed in the July 15th, 2021 staff report. Am I reading the wrong one?
I was worried that you were reading off of someone else's screen, so I didn't know if your TV
Oh,
wasn't
no, I
working.
just, rather than switching, we're all friends.
Oh, okay.
Item one, a 1,832.88 square foot variation to permit a lot that is 14,417.12 square feet instead of the required minimum of 16,250 square feet. Number two, a 14.76 foot variation to permit a lot width of 100.24 feet instead of the required minimum of 15 feet. Number three, a 0.2 foot variation to permit a primary front yard setback of 29.76 feet instead of the required minimum of 30 feet. Item four, a 4.75 foot variation to permit a secondary front yard setback of 25.25 feet instead of the required minimum of 30 feet. And item five, a 0.22 foot variation to permit a side yard setback of 9.78 feet instead of the required minimum of 10 feet.
Do I have a second?
I second.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes.
I'd just like to make a modification to that
Sure,
motion.
sure.
Under number two, I believe that should be 115 feet, not 15.
Oh.
Oh, correct.
Yes,
Instead of the
that is
required
true.
Minimum of 150, yeah.
Okay.
Okay.
Who does it?
Good
Wha-
catch.
As
Good
amended.
catch, Commissioner Shaw. Excellent. Okay, then I will ask for a second again under that modification.
I second.
Okay. Motion made by Commissioner West, seconded by Commissioner Lasciuto. Secretary may I have a roll call. I mean, Lori, I apologize.
Commissioner Gasco,
Yes.
Commissioner Nishida,
Yes.
Commissioner Manning,
Yes.
Commissioner Shaw,
Yes.
Commissioner Vargas,
Yes.
Commissioner West,
Yes.
Chair Gray.
Yes. Okay, the motion is carried. Now may I have motion number two regarding the final plat.
I'll make a motion to recommend that the village board grant approval to the petitioner Randy Ludke, final plat of subdivision approval for the property located at 6303 175th Street in accordance with the final plat adapt dated April 30th, 2021, subject to the condition that it is subject to final approval by the village engineer prior to recording.
Do I have a second?
Second?
Okay, motion made by Commissioner Manny, seconded by Commissioner Shaw. Could I please get the roll call?
Commissioner Gasco,
Yes.
Commissioner Nishida,
Yes.
Commissioner Manning,
Yes.
Commissioner Shaw,
Yes.
Commissioner Vargas,
Yes.
Commissioner West,
Yes.
Chairman Gray.
Yes. Okay, the motion is carried. So, Mr. Ludke, this item will go to the village board on Tuesday, August 3rd, 2021. So please be in attendance, and if you can't be in attendance, get with staff on how you can either attend over the phone.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you for your time.
I'll follow up with you. You're welcome to stay, also not stay if you got better things. Yeah.
Thank you.
We'll move on to item number 2. Item number 2 is a workshop to consider recommending the village board grant Jason Terry and Tony Scott Terry, the property owners, a special use for a dwelling located above a principal commercial use and site plan architectural approval at 7151 183rd Street in the B3 PUD General Business and Commercial Holiday Inn/Convention Center PUD zoning district. Staff, if you could please make your presentation for the workshop at this time.
Thank you. This is the property at 7151 183rd Street. Here is a photo of the frontage that you can see of the property. The petitioner, Dr. Tony Scott Terry, is here in the audience with us and can go through any questions that you may have going forward. But to summarize the nature of its location and the request, I'll address this in my presentation. So this is an aerial that shows the footprint of the site. As you can see, it is southeast of Harlem and 183rd. It's an existing building that has, to the left portion of the building, was an addition added in 2005. And the building was, some background history, it was developed in the early 1970s under the Cook County jurisdiction and was operating as Hirsch Memorial. And this property was annexed into the village in 1985. The building has an existing second floor apartment. Eventually the business changed hands to what we would know as the Heartland Memorial Center. And in 2017, that property closed. The property has been vacant since. So this is a map of the zoning district. So it is in the B3 with the convention center property to the southeast. And under previous approvals, so as I mentioned, there was an apartment in 2005. A special use permit was granted for the apartment in conjunction with the funeral home and crematorium usage. In 2005, the building addition was constructed. So the building originally was a little over 5,300 square feet. The addition, and this is footprint wise, the footprint addition was 3,650 square feet. There was also the same year a landscaping plan that was approved by the village. So here you can see the site plan, and this is the landscaping plan. So I'd like to go over the proposed uses for this development. So there's, this building is composed of a basement, a ground floor, and the second floor. The second floor is for the apartment only. The ground floor and basement has a variety of multiple proposed business uses. So the applicant in her narrative has explained these uses. First is the practice of Scott Terry Female Health Associates. It's a gynecology practice. And then secondly is the Allure Laser and Medical Spa. Also, there is a meeting area, which the applicant had referred to as a basement conference center, that would be located to serve as a small seminar space for existing patients and clients. There's also a proposed wellness and fitness center. So there will be proposed fitness equipment as well as a yoga studio. And lastly, in the basement location, there is proposed leasable space for future tenant. The petitioner has clarified that this will be for medical office-related use, such as a dermatology or plastic surgery type of use. And so the first item for consideration is the special use for an apartment. Please note that this was previously approved in conjunction with it operating as a funeral home. So the residential unit first off, if there's the reason that the special use is required is if a residential unit is above or to the rear of a principal commercial structure, it requires this approval. Staff recommends that the residential units be above the commercial uses with separate entrances and a balcony or exterior living area if possible. Also, there should be consideration pertaining to the mix of the surrounding uses and the site layout. To consider nuisances such as noise, pollution, smells, glare. This property, as I mentioned, received the approval for special use for the funeral home and crematorium. You can see below a floor plan exhibit that the applicant has provided, and she is proposing to remodel the existing apartment with a new deck. Point to note, there was previously a deck that has now been removed that had spanned the entire length of the apartment. There currently is no deck. The applicant is proposing to, at the lower left of the floor plan, you can see a much smaller rectangular deck with a wood-treated deck. Just a note about special uses. This special use allowance has existed in the B1, B2, and B3 districts since 2005, and it aligns with current planning development trends towards mixed-use properties and provides property tax relief from the county classification. Staff also notes to avoid issues with substandard units, to, again, consider the separate entrances. I'll note in my next slide one issue with that. Lastly, the unit itself, the size of the unit is not changing. It is 1,243 square feet, and it is a 3-bedroom. So this is the only issue as I've identified in the staff report. The unit has 2 entrances. The west entrance is separate from the business. It has a vestibule that you can see highlighted in dashed red on the left. However, the east entry on the right is shared with a business employee space. So I've listed 2 of the first open items below to discuss the request for special use permit for the addition of a residence above a principal commercial structure, and to clarify the security measures and separation of business and apartment spaces. Also, you'll note at the west entry, it does not appear that there's a walkway. So open item number 2 is to revise plans to add a walkway to the separate apartment entrance door. So this is the site plan as proposed currently by the applicant. I've noted a few things. I'd like to first point out the access, noted in red arrows. So primary access is along 183rd Street. There's currently 2 entry points. The west driveway is much narrower and thus only permitted as a one-way driveway. The eastern driveway is larger and 2 ways for directions. There is 2 portico shares. The north portico share would be part of that one-directional traffic. There is a proposed do not enter sign with arrow markings as part of this proposal. You also see at the southeast corner of the site is cross-access to the neighboring multi-tenant strip mall. So there are several other improvements that relate to the landscaping and site development, so I'll just summarize them while you can see the site plan. So in addition to the access, which has no change, but except for the directional signage, the applicant wishes to convert the garage, which is part of that addition that was added in 2005, to a fitness center. This will have new overhead doors. There will also be new condenser units to be located, 2 units on the south of the property. There is the addition of 3 new parking stalls, new landscaping that will require foundational landscaping elements as well. That is noted to the north and south, dark shaded of the existing garage post fitness center. There'll be a new trash enclosure gate And staff also notes that ADA compliance will be required. There is no new lighting proposed, and also the site plan has been reviewed by staff, including engineering. Additional information may be needed with the permit. Staff recommends that the site plan approval be conditioned upon final engineering review and approval. I have noted a third open item to confirm the removal of the existing sign and provide location and details of the proposed sign. If the sign is set back less than 10 feet, a variation is requested. This is relating to the northeast end of the property. You can see there is an existing ground sign there. So for landscaping, the previously approved plan in 2005 consisted of a one-sheet drawing that included a plant list and construction note specifications. The current conditions of the property, the landscaping is overgrown in some areas with weeds. The petitioner has had a landscaper come by to begin evaluation of the site. And the proposal, will involve some modifications, relocation of some landscaping elements. The staff recommends to clarify the compliance with the previously approved landscape plan to be met prior to building occupancy. So open item number 4 is to discuss the recommended condition regarding the compliance with the previously approved landscaping plan. So regarding architecture, these are a series of photos that show some of the primary elements. So at the top, you see the photo as looking from the vicinity of where the existing ground sign is, from the northeast of the property. As I mentioned, there are 2 porte cocheres, so you see the east porte cochere on the left of that photo, and then in the middle is the main porte cochere at the north of the property, with the garage to the west, and the bottom photo is an image showing the current rear of the property. So for the proposal, the applicant is proposing overhead doors to be aluminum sectional with sealing, to be sealed. Sealing will prevent entry of rodents, water, bugs, that sort of thing. The style, framing, color, and finish are yet to be determined. For the mechanical condenser units, there are no proposed changes to the existing units. These units are at the front of the property, currently fenced in to the west of the main porte cochere entry. The proposed 2 units height and the plant species type and height are not indicated. Screening is required. It is not required to be landscape screening, but the applicant is proposing landscape screening. Out of the 2 units, the one on the east is proposed currently as only partially screened. Petitioner is also considering wall signage, but has not provided any specific locations or sign design details. The small deck that will be proposed will be on the rear of the property, treated wood with code-compliant guardrails. Staff recommends a condition to clarify that the mechanical equipment visibility and placement be reviewed in conjunction with the building permit process. Open item number 5, identify any proposed changes to the existing mechanical equipment and fencing at the front of the property, and to review a recommended condition that landscape screening be reviewed by staff. Building permit prior to permit issuance. Regarding the upgrades, this is just a summary of what I've discussed already. And then under signage, some details. This is a photo showing the existing ground sign. Please note that this is a proposed multi-tenant situation in a single tenant designed building. Staff has been in contact with the petitioner regarding branding, proposing a single branding concept to identify the site. So the petitioner is considering Allure Wellness Center. The existing ground sign is currently proposed to be removed. Note that it appears to be non-conforming to the property line. Code requires a minimum 10-foot setback. The petitioner does have the right to reuse the face replacement with no structural support changes. And for wall signage, per code, 1 sign per elevation is permitted. But at this point, the applicant does not provide any signage. Regarding parking, there is a request for a parking variation. The minimum requirements are determined by the zoning code's Section 8 use categories. So there are 3 identified uses relevant to this project. The use categories differ than how Section 5 categories are. They're summarized in a different format for the use of parking calculation. The medical or dental office category would be shown here highlighted in green, and that is categorized by rooms. Specifically, it is 2 spaces for each office, exam, or treatment room, plus 1 space per employee. Personal services establishment is the second category, and that is shown in red. That is identified by square footage. The petitioner's architect has provided those calculations, and that is shown in light pink on the diagrams. And then thirdly, apartments are by unit number, so there's 1 unit. 2.5 spaces are required. We round down at that point, so 2 spaces would be required. This is a chart that you can see. So there is a requirement of 87 parking spaces. Only 76 are proposed. The applicant is improving the parking situation by adding 3 stalls, going from 73 to 76. Also, it would be helpful to note there is no additional land to expand the parking. One concern might be that parking could spill over into the adjacent areas and affecting the neighborhood. 183rd Street does not have on-site permitted parking, and there are no adjacent residences. So in regards to management for the parking, the owner will need to actively manage the situation so their businesses and the community is not negatively affected. And to head off any further concerns, staff would recommend that the commission consider a condition requiring parking to remain on site. These are a summary of the open 7 items. And that concludes the staff presentation.
Okay, thank you, Lori. At this time, I'll invite the petitioner to come forward and speak if you want to make a presentation.
Sorry for being late. I actually had an emergency surgery. I had to take a patient. But I actually have a medical spa currently that's in Tinley Park, and my medical spa currently is across the street from the proposed site that we are intending to expand to. So the goal of this is actually have a wellness center in the south suburb. We don't really have anything like that here. So we do IV infusions. It would be the medical spa side of it. We're actually going to, once we've kind of moved into it, maybe add massages. I have a medical practice as well. So all of that would be encompassing. Starting with the first item for the proposed use for the apartment, that area, as far as the entrance, there will be an area where we're actually building a sidewalk. It's the one that's on the south west side, so the one in the back. There will be another sidewalk that's there as well, so that won't be blank. And for the special use, if there is something as far as the entrance into the spa, we can actually close off that door if that's a concern that the committee has. My plan was to actually use that space more for personal space for myself than to actually completely lease it out to a stranger, but that's my goal, is to actually use it for a personal space. So that was did you have questions about that section?
Well,
It also would help with tax relief for the building.
Dr. Scott Terry, we'll hear some comments from you, and then as
Okay.
the commissioners have questions, feel free to answer those questions.
Okay. As far as the signage, the current signage is past the building. So I've been across the street for almost 6 years. I didn't realize that building I never paid attention to it. It has a lot of overgrown weeds. You can't really see the building very well. And once you get to the sign, because even people that I've actually had to meet me there, they miss it because you've passed the entrance before you get to the sign. So we're trying to actually move the signage before, and there is a section, and I'm pretty sure when the landscaper came by on Saturday, he did think that we would be able to sit it back 10 feet, that it's before the entrance into the driveway. There is a section there, and we're looking at, I've spoken to at least 3 companies that does signage. I still want to keep a monument. I'd like an LED where we can actually list new things that are coming out within whatever the recommendations from the committee. But that's what we're looking at, is actually still removing the existing one and adding another monument for signage. As far as the landscaping, I did have a landscaper come out. He hasn't completed the plans. He did recommend, there's a picture that you can see on the central portion of the front elevation. It's hard to see the building. So we were trying to find ways to keep in plans with the previous landscape approved plan, but still have the visibility of the structure so that people would know where we were readily. The fitness center with the garage doors, they will be tinted, but this is going to be more of a boutique fitness center. It's not going to have a lot of equipment, but it's more for a boutique for the clients that in my medical practice, at the spa, and the IV infusion center. So they have everything all in one space. The next and last one was the parking. So when I submitted the information for the parking, I listed the total hours that our phones are on, but all of our appointments in the spa, in the office, all of our clients come by appointment. So there won't be a large amount of people there at one time because everybody is set by appointments. So we'll be able to manage the parking in that manner. I was just giving the full amount of time that the phones are open, but not when we're actually seeing patients. Like on certain days, we may not start until noon, even though the phones may come on at 9. So we'll definitely be able to manage the amount of traffic that will be in the parking situation.
Dr. Scott Terry, if I may, so what are the hours for the wellness center? Where all aspects, are some go
So,
on a little longer? Or
They will be different. So
Okay.
my office will have different hours than the medical spa. And the fitness center will probably have hours starting from 6, and I can give you, if you want to know when patients are being seen. So it's different. So in my office, I see patients Monday, Tuesday, and Fridays, and every other Saturday. So the staff is there on the other days, and they're taking care of, patient callbacks and those kind of things, but I'm not physically there seeing patients or clients. As far as the spa, we're not open on Mondays, and we're not open on Sundays. And they are by appointment, and all of my employees are part-time, so no one's there every day. They're all there on different days. So the rooms are not 100% in use 100% of the time. And some of the rooms are just where we're taking pictures, or it's a relaxation place, but it is not, quote-unquote, in active use.
Okay. Okay, if there's no further comments, I will ask our
Okay.
commissioners for any questions or questions that they may have, starting with Commissioner Vargas.
I don't really have any questions. It's more of a comment. I was there as well. It's that property, and I agree with you about the landscaping. It's overgrown, and the building's hard to see. I actually passed it myself with the signage, so I do agree with you on those aspects of it. That's really all questions I had at this time, or comments I had at this time.
Okay, thank you. Commissioner Manny.
No comments. And, actually you answered some, my questions, but, no other comments.
Commissioner Shaw.
You're currently in the Tinley Point building,
Across the street,
across the street, the Dunkin'
the
Donuts
Dunkin'
building?
Donuts.
Oh, that's good. Good to see that you're expanding. Hate to see you move out of that building now.
Yeah, well, that building's had some.
So the, for that property, you mentioned that you're leaning more towards using the apartment space for personal as opposed to leasing it out. I guess this is really more a question for staff, just to clarify that second entrance. The concern there is that it's a shared common entrance, meaning the office leads into it and the apartment leads into the office space. That's what we're talking about there. Okay, so I don't think closing it up is an option, right? Doesn't there need to be, are there safety concerns with there being secondary egress or something like that?
They might be able to do locking mechanisms, so obviously you'd have to get out going that way, so it might be able to be like lock up, like you can't get into it from there, but you'd be able to get out, so.
So security for the resident, not necessarily for the business.
Well,
Yeah.
so the resident couldn't get into the
Office space.
office space. That would really be more of, we've had some of these, so an English Garden got approved for like an apartment there. She runs her business kind of on the first floor, and there is really no separate entrance there. It's kind of a shared area. When you walk in there, you go up the steps to the apartment or to the left to the office. They kind of prefer it to be separate, or at least they're an ability to be, so that way, we're making it a livable space
Right.
and somewhere a Tinley resident could be. And so if she wants to lease it out, I think she might want to be able to put a door there to say, okay, I don't want these people to be able to go into my medical space. I think there's probably some HIPAA laws there too.
Yeah.
So if there's an ability to put a door there, maybe that's just sufficient enough that if she leases it out, she can always put one there,
Okay.
with a building permit, of course.
So, but as we consider these, we don't, or maybe I'm making an assumption here, we don't differentiate between owner-occupied and lease space, right? We have to design it as though it were leased?
Yeah, it could, you kind of do it either or. You design it as a way where it could be owner occupied or leased.
Okay.
So we could, on the plans where towards the southwest entrance, we could close that off, going into the spa space and just make it a wall so they couldn't, so that wouldn't be access to the spa.
You'll
that
just
is a
have to
concern.
ask your architect if there's a need for an egress point there, because
Okay.
there's certain distances you have to meet. So
Mhm.
if if your architect draws it on the plans that we approve and
Okay,
it meets the code, you could do that. Or it could be, again, a door that locks from that foyer area, but you can still get out it. So,
okay,
and then you'd have presumably another door at some point to the apartment that would lock too. So your employees can't get into the apartment, the
Right.
apartment tenant couldn't
Could
get into
get-
the.
Either way, that's an open item that you guys are working through, right?
Yeah.
Okay, all right.
So we can
I-
have some clarity on it at least at the next one, which way it's gonna go.
Yeah, it was mostly for me, I wanted to make sure I understood what the nature of the concern was, and that I was understanding it correctly.
With it being owner, with the business owner being the one occupying and owning the property, it's kind of helpful that she's going to, again, want to block that space off and make that choice herself. If this was maybe, you didn't know who was gonna be on the first floor, maybe you'd push for it a little bit more up front, just to make sure there wasn't an issue. And that special use is tied to the property owner and the businesses, so it doesn't run with the land. So if this is sold and there's a new business, they'd have to go back through this process.
Right, but if it was approved under the assumption that it was gonna be owner occupied and that it was okay, and then somewhere down the road it was leased out, then we're backed into that same situation. So, I think it's wise to just approach it with the assumption that it's going to be non-owner occupied, or could be at some point. That way we don't have any concerns about it. So one thing about that property currently, it is off a Convention Center Drive. Other than the development to the east of there, there's really no other residential or mixed use in that area, other than the Tinley Point building across. There's, in terms of pedestrian access to the site, I don't recall, I don't think that there's any sidewalks down
no,
183rd on that side. Is that accurate?
It's not great. It kind of ends at, it now goes to the point of that of Convention Center Drive. It's up to that point with the bike path. But everything west from that drive to Burger King doesn't exist.
Right. And there's no crossing at Convention Center Drive either. And I realize that's 183rd, is that a state road?
It's ours now. It was county. I believe that portion is owned by the village now after their development. So it is on the priority list for our sidewalk expansion program.
Okay.
And that's why the sidewalks, I believe it goes up to Culver's as well now too. So they've been slowly kind of filling those in down 183rd, but it does cost money, so it's a little slower than we all like.
And so the outlots to the east of Convention Center Drive there's a big open space there. Is the zoning for that the same? I guess what I'm looking at is that envisioned for also potential mixed-use development as well? Because what I'm looking at is right here, the potential for having a single apartment up there. It's kind of an island, right?
Yeah, some people have inquired about that lot. I, been approached by a few folks, and, I have encouraged that as a potential, use, thinking that could be a great opportunity. The taxes, are an issue, but, with across the street, I thought mixed use would be good. We just haven't found anyone quite yet. Someone did approach me of just doing townhomes, and I said no, but we would consider mixed use.
Okay.
And standalone commercial is permitted there, but I think we've always kind of encouraged potentially mixed use there.
Yep. Okay. That's all the questions I have right now.
Okay.
Thank you, Doctor.
Thank you, Commissioner Shaw. Commissioner Gaskell.
No comment.
Commissioner West.
I'm gonna concur with what Commissioner Shaw said about the assumption being that it wouldn't be owner occupied just because circumstances change and who knows what next week might bring. Excuse me, not knowing the scope of your current business, are there any concerns about noise, smells, toxicity, anything that happens in your practice or potential activities happening in that practice that might impact the residential unit?
No.
Okay. I mean, obviously it would
We're
be-
pretty quiet.
Sorry.
We're pretty quiet.
Okay. Well, I mean,
And there's
obviously,
no
if you're
different
in a
chemicals
work
that,
area, it would be different, but,
yeah, we're not using different chemicals that's gonna emit odors.
okay. Thank you, that's all.
Commissioner Lushuto.
I too want to agree with Commissioner Shaw and Commissioner West with regards to the entranceway, because I do understand that you're stating now that you're going to use it for your own property, but in the future, you could lease it out as an apartment, and, you know, there would be safety concerns if, you know, for your business and for the resident, to have some sort of, you know, locking mechanisms in place so that those areas couldn't be accessed. I do have to agree with you with the parking, the fact that you do make appointments. I don't see parking being an issue. The one thing I would add that I would like to see then, if you are gonna have the apartment, have, you know, 2 spaces actually designated for the apartment parking. That's all I have.
Yeah, that's fine.
Okay, thanks, Commissioner Lushuto. Dr. Scott Terry, I appreciate you being here, and I'm glad that you were able to talk about some of those open items, because I did have some questions that you did answer in your talk. I do have still some questions. I think part of that is because we're here to provide you some direction. There were some question marks in terms of some of the materials or some of the open items that stated that we need still more information on the sign, the ground sign. You mentioned you are going to relocate it to the west because it is being missed if it stays at the east. But we still need to have some sort of location. So consult your architect on where that location would be. What would be the dimensions of the sign? And then you mentioned what your hopes for the sign were, but we'd like to see what that would look like. Another thing that was an open item 3 was, it was mentioned that the gates for the trash enclosure do have to be replaced.
Yes,
And so, okay.
yeah, my builder is aware.
Okay, excellent. Just want to make sure that is restated, that it would get addressed. The clear overhead door, now we saw some of the, I guess, advertisements or models, for lack of a better term, but in terms of what the staff would need, they would need the exact style, framing, and so on and so forth. It is going to be clear, though, is my understanding from the staff report?
Yes.
Okay.
It will have a tint to it as well, just so that you can't readily look
Okay.
completely through.
100% agree.
Yes.
For security reasons, absolutely. And how, in terms of the doorways that you're looking at, the overhead door, do you have an idea of when you would have that kind of honed down to? I know you're going to probably work with staff and work with your builder.
So we've actually met with a couple of places already. So I'm hoping by next week.
Okay.
We'll actually have the door and the color, everything
Oh, wow.
already picked out.
Okay, excellent. Yeah, and if you do get those, please share with
Yeah.
staff so that,
As soon as I get everything, like
Okay.
individual, I'll send it over.
yeah, so that we can see, put our eyeballs on it as a commission going forward. Same with, there was the idea of all these small businesses within one building. You're going to have a dedicated sign. Would we be able to see some architectural drawings with, are you going to go with Allure Wellness Center? Is that still?
So the main will say
Sure.
Allure Wellness Center, and then there will be a list of so it'll have the medical spa, it'll have the office, it will have the infusion center, the fitness center, so they know what's actually a part of the wellness center.
Okay.
Especially if we bring on a dermatologist or a plastic surgeon, so they know who's there.
Okay. And then I know going back to open item 1, I do think a special use permit is adequate for the apartment. It was approved in 2005. You're changing out the balcony. I concur with Commissioner Shaw's comments that were echoed by Commissioner West in terms of just to be on the safe side, you know, if it changes owners or you have a change of heart on that apartment, in terms of having a separate user other than yourself. And that was one of my concerns. If you had a separate user and he's throwing a big party, it might throw off your parking ratio, right? So, but I concur with Commissioner Lasciuto too. It seems like you do have a bead on your times and the clients are coming in. And I am reassured by the fact that you have appointments and that you have a boutique fitness center that will be contained.
Yes.
So the deficient 11 parking spots, I do not believe will be an issue. So you did quell my concerns about that. And I do want to Commissioner Shaw has always pushed for sidewalks. I 100% agree with him. From somebody who walks, if there's any opportunity with staff, I'm not saying necessarily for this project, I'm just saying going forward, I think that is little bit by little, you're able to connect the community by these sidewalks. So I like hearing that because I concur with that 100%. With that, I don't think I have any other comments. I'm going to put this back out to the commissioners. Do you have any other further comments?
I would,
Commissioner Shaw?
I would just like to agree, I hadn't thought about that, about the dedicating the parking spaces, designating them for a resident.
I have made note.
I don't know that I'd make that a condition of approval, it's just a really good idea.
Right, I concur as well. So,
I think we have made those conditions on previous ones, like, so, Avocado Theory, I think, has that, and,
Okay.
the other the George St. Curry, when his came forward, I think we had those, so,
But
it
with
makes,
76,
Yeah, it makes
I don't-
sense in downtown.
yeah, because those were pretty limited parking stalls, but it still, I guess, helps if you know, to know you're gonna park near your entrance, not at the back of the parking lot, if you live there.
Yeah, if that's a reasonable, condition and it's not burdensome, then sure. It wouldn't be the deciding factor for me.
right. With that said, staff, do you feel it necessary to review kind of what we've discussed in terms of these open items? Or
I think we probably have some good feedback. I don't know if we
Okay.
gotta run through them or anything.
Okay, fair enough. And for the petitioner, just keep in contact with staff.
Oh,
It
absolutely.
seems like you've been doing that to begin with, so continue that great effort. With that, Doctor, there will be a public hearing on this matter at the August 5th, 2021 Plan Commission meeting. So please mark that on your calendar, be in attendance, and if you cannot, get with staff on how you can attend virtually or via phone.
Okay,
And thank you for your time.
thank you so much.
Thank you.
Okay, we'll move on to item 3. Item 3 is a workshop to consider a proposed text amendment to certain sections of the Tinley Park zoning ordinance for adult-use cannabis dispensing organizations to be additionally permitted in the B1, ORI, M1, MU1, and Rich Township Entertainment Districts. Also to eliminate requirements requiring that their location be in a standalone building and along designated commercial corridors, 159th Street, Harlem Avenue, and LaGrange Road. Staff, please make your presentation at this time.
Thanks, Chairman. Yeah, so this is a workshop making some kind of tweaks to the cannabis zoning that came before the Plan Commission last year. Some of you were on it, some of you not, and we have a new staff here, so just as a brief overview, in 2019 is when the Cannabis Regulation and Tax Act in Illinois was passed, that basically set out certain licenses that could get approved kind of in the beginning of 2020. And so that act became effective January 1st and allowed possession and private use of cannabis, as well as sales that are fairly heavily regulated by the state. It left it open to municipalities to kind of zone them how they wish. They could outright prohibit them, they could allow them, in certain numbers or certain zoning districts. So there was quite a process here in Tinley, kind of driven by the board. It's a little bit of a policy decision when it was a change in cannabis. So they did do some feedback and outreach to the residents in Tinley Park. Did some surveys, kind of get some feedback and to see if they were open to it at all or what kind of regulations they wanted. So, and this worked its way from the village board, plan commission. There was a moratorium hold on the licenses for the time, but on August 4th, 2020 is when the board adopted the regulations for that. Since that time, though, none of the licenses have been available, so most of them were gone by the time those regulations were in effect, and once we opened it up. But since that time, staff has been talking with potential cannabis dispensary operators that, you know, are looking that there's going to be hopefully some new licenses that come on here fairly shortly. And we wanted to be ready for them to come. And so with those talks, it was pretty clear that finding a location was fairly difficult. So the current regulations that are out there really limited it to B2 and B3 zoning districts. It had to be a standalone building, and there's a residential setback of a couple 100 feet. It had to be on certain designated corridors, so 159th, LaGrange, Harlem. There's a limit of 1, and there's a few other limits that you'll see in your packet as well, that were put into effect there. So with all those regulations, and again, B2 and B3 zoning districts is a special use. With all of that, it was finding pretty difficult to find a standalone building on those streets that was available for them to purchase. So with a preference, we find with most of them, it was a preference to purchase, but they could lease. And so just kind of in the discussions with them, we were looking at, is there a way, are we basically kind of zoning it out with some of these regulations? Is there some flexibility we can give potentially? So when it's time, when the licenses are available, they can locate here. Staff brought this to the committee of the whole meeting at the village board on the 29th, just for some general direction, where they said move forward with proposing kind of a text amendment that's here before you guys today. Really, the overall changes here are really allowing it in potentially multi-tenant structures and not just standalone buildings, removing those corridor requirements, and then allowing it as a special use in some additional zoning districts. So it would be not just B2, B3, it would also be B1, ORI, M1, and then the overlay districts, which are Demand Drive overlay, and then the Rich Tourism District. So here's our existing use chart for the cannabis. As you can see, for the most part, everything's prohibited when it comes to growing, processing. The only thing we allow, again, special use for dispensaries, B2, B3. And then here's our existing location regulations. There are more than this as well, including certain submittal requirements, conditions they need to meet on the special use. But here's just kind of the location ones that we were looking at. And so the proposal would open that up to add the special uses to the B1, ORI, M1, MU1, which is Duband Drive, and then we'd also add it into the tourism district as well. So just still special uses, still goes through a regulatory process through you guys and the village board to look at how does this affect neighboring properties, what's the parking like, what are the utilities like, how does it affect the community in general at that location. So the concerns there kind of from the zoning district standpoint, we still think can be covered through that special use process, while allowing potential dispensary operators a little more flexibility with trying to find a location in the village that would actually work for them as well. So, and here's just kind of the proposed removal of a couple of those location conditions. And that's it from the staff report. So just putting it before you guys to hopefully make a couple tweaks, loosen it up a little bit.
Okay. Thanks, Dan. I will ask our commissioners if they have any questions or comments. I'll begin with Commissioner Lasciuto.
No questions.
Commissioner West.
Yeah, so the only concern I have is removing the language about it being a standalone building. And I'm speaking from some personal experience here. I recently worked at the Department of Veterans Affairs, and one of our clinics was in Aurora, and it was co-located in a large multi-tenant building with a medical dispensary. And so as part of my job, I visited all of the clinics, and you know, it was I think the building was built in the 80s, so there's kind of like a large central courtyard, and then, you know, surrounding businesses, and the clinic was on the basement floor. It was a constant struggle for the entire clinic to not reek of cannabis. Whether or not you like the smell, that's neither here nor there, but it was, and in fact, I think a lot of our veterans came and had their appointment and then visited the dispensary upstairs, so that was very convenient. But and again, I know it was an older building, so there might have been some ventilation issues, but I do know that that is a concern with that type of business. So I wonder, and this might not even be possible, if there's a way to put in language saying, like, it can be in a multi-tenant building if the dispensary owns the building, but if it's a case where somebody else, you know, if it's owned by a property management company or something, if a dispensary moves in next door and that impacts the business next to it, that's not really in everybody's best interest. But if the dispensary company owned the building, they could be a little choosier about who was going in there. I'm kind of thinking off the cuff here, but do you understand what I'm saying?
Yeah, absolutely.
So I am happy to see that it's being opened up and loosened up, so we're not zoning it out of use with our language, but I do have some concerns about that co-tenancy language.
I think one suggestion, because I brought this up in the very beginning when we were analyzing this, and that was one of my comments. I wonder, maybe not the ownership issue, but it could be a condition that they must demonstrate that the building or the space that they will occupy will provide upgraded, you know, ventilation, or maybe we even make that as a condition, so someone isn't gonna come in and do it cheap. We're gonna say, you know what, the expectation is you're gonna demonstrate that, and that could be a condition that in the event there's complaints in the future, that, you know, that's almost on the license part of it. You know, with the village hall, we could say, kind of like liquor licenses, you get so many complaints, and they can say, you know what, we're done. But to your point, I think maybe we could still look at something in there as part of their submittal to you all to demonstrate, what are you doing with the current HVAC system?
The thing, though, that concerns me is even an HVAC system, it's gonna be ventilating out the smell.
Yeah.
That still goes somewhere, right? It's still gonna be outside the building, even if it's not impacting the interior of the next door business. It's gonna be in the parking lot and so on and so forth. What benefit does allowing co-tenancy provide? It just opens up more opportunities?
Yeah, I mean, that was the thought. And to tell you the truth, a lot of these shopping centers that we've researched in our community, they are owned by large management companies. They currently still will not lease to these uses, because we learned if they have a mortgage on their property, their mortgage with the bank actually prohibits them from renting to these type of users. So do I think it's gonna be a lot of requests? No, but we don't know what's gonna change down the road. But we do know it's limiting right now, but there could still be a few landlords we did talk to that said, because they own their lot, they own their property free and clear, that they would potentially lease out. But in general, yes, it was to provide some more options. Preferably, I do think the standalone is the best control because of the type of business it is, but many of them aren't able to build from the ground up, they wanna move in right away, so.
And to, one, there's kind of a separate side to that too, because you kind of picture, okay, multi-tenant buildings. So you can have multi-floor buildings, you get to have your shopping center. But if you look at like, I think it's Park Center, the one with Aldi in it now, the new Aldi, like that one actually has separate outlet buildings that are actually part of the same parcel. Same with across the street, so kind of different. Or like where the Fannie Mae outlet store is, like that's its own kind of little separate building. Maybe you could, it's a multi-tenant shopping center, but maybe they're kind of in their own building too. I think there was a change though, so the medical stuff was a little different when they came in with the recreational dispensaries. They set in a lot more limits, not even, I think it included HVAC upgrades, but then also like you can't advertise, you can't have a pot leaf on it, you can't have green lighting around your roof, like, so they were trying to control the images more too. So I'd be interested to maybe see if there is anything even in the state law on that.
Deanna, it's testing my memory. I remember when this came across the Planning Commission, whatever, a year or so ago. Also, too, we had some other stipulations. You had to have, you couldn't have transparent bags. They had to be opaque. But I thought there was no smoking allowed on site. But yet, still, that's going to reek.
Oh, the storage.
Oh, okay.
area.
See, part of my naiveness, but, yeah, I'm a product of Nancy Reagan. I just said no when I was growing up, so,
And I
okay.
think there was a couple operators that came to the village board meetings and kind of explained how and what they do. And for these ones, it's almost more controlled than the medical dispensary stuff ever was, because they have to have it packaged behind counters. I would assume it's a little less, but I don't really know. But that would be interesting to find out. Because I do think it's a little more controlled now than it was with the medical stuff when that first came about.
I think Commissioner West brings up a good issue, because if you're a tenant there and then your neighbor comes in, and then it could possibly negatively impact your business. That's probably something very real.
I'm also conscientious of the fact, you're saying like if it's like a liquor license where if there are a certain number of complaints, we can pull that. I think the nature of it is that there are people that are gonna be opposed to cannabis being sold in the village anywhere, anytime, no matter what. And so I think that may bring some of these more scurrilous complaints out of the woodwork.
Yeah, nuisance
Yeah.
complaints that are just there. We can look at though, there's separate conditions you review with the special use for this. I think we added a couple. I'll have to look and see if those cover this situation, but we can make it specific to ventilation, HVAC, how it vents, because you figure if it's a standalone building, that could also vent out into someone else's property. But we can call some of the other communities too that have this. I know I can call Joliet. I know has been out there. I don't think there's been many complaints. Worth and some of the other ones that are out there.
Okay, thank you, Commissioner West. Commissioner Gaskell, any comments?
No, thank you.
Okay, Commissioner Shaw.
Just a few points here. I wasn't around when this went through last year. I was paying attention, but I haven't had a chance to go back to the previous discussions. For the sake of argument, I'm going to assume that you guys beat it up really good, and it went to the board and it was approved, right? So as I read the ordinance, as written, it states up front, what I would say is kind of the intentions or the objectives in the whereases. But it states that the text amendment will improve the health and safety and welfare of the village, contribute favorably to economic development, foster the intent and purpose of the zoning ordinance, and be in the best interest of the village, okay? So, as written, those were the objectives. Now, I see the first and second as potentially being competing objectives, right? The health and safety of the community and economic development, right? So you could limit one by going too far in the direction of the other. So for me, I'm looking at this not from scratch, as the commission had to do and the board had to do last time. I'm looking at this solely from the proposal that's in front of us to make a change to what was already there. So I'm not necessarily looking to revisit what has already been looked at. And so on the face of it, I'm looking at it from the perspective of what has changed, why is this in front of us? And from what you said, the thought is, and potentially you've gotten feedback from the business community, that as our ordinance currently sits, we're limiting the potential sites. Is that right? And when I'm looking at these objectives as laid out, which of these proposed changes do they hit, and why were they put in there in the first place? So limiting it to a corridor and then requiring a standalone building, there's been some discussion here about why we would want a standalone building, right? And I myself don't know enough to really form an opinion on that. So that for me, the jury's still out, and I'll wait to hear more on that. But I definitely, there have been other types of businesses where they have imposed upon neighboring businesses, right? Just, it's overpowering, not necessarily cannabis. So I understand that one. The limiting it to certain corridors, that's one I don't necessarily understand, and as long as we are, it's being proposed, I guess what would be useful to me, and I'm sorry, I wasn't here when it was discussed, what was the intent there? I have to, because it's a limitation, I have to assume that it was aiming towards health and safety as opposed to fostering economic development, so.
So the approach to that, actually, Lombard was one of the first communities that really dove deep into drafting an ordinance well before the law changed. And they did take that approach because they too, similar to Tinley, had major roads coming through their towns that they know people are traversing regularly. And they felt that this type of use is going to draw people from other areas potentially, because not everyone has them. So knowing that, they thought it was best to keep them in those high traffic areas that, people are kind of coming through the community anyways, instead of maybe more smaller collector roads that you might be going through more neighborhoods and things like that. And so when we think of our community, we think of our major route, 159th Street, Harlem Avenue, LaGrange. We're already having that high traffic, and that's where these users want to be anyways. They're a retail, they want to be seen. So that, again, with also taking conservative approach when we first adopted this, we thought that was a good approach. Lombard did it, and it also seemed to be supported by the community taking that first approach. I think what did come out in the conversation too, particularly with the chief of police, is the opinion was that it was preferred to have these uses in highly visible areas and not tucked away into more, uses like, in industrial parks where you're the thought was, from a police perspective, is we want to see it, we want to drive by it, we want lots of eyes on it. And so, again, I think that also tied into the corridor conversation. But when we look at our community and we take a step back and, we see where the little pockets of commercials are. I mean, there's not really a commercial center you have to really drive deep into to get to. They're still all pretty off of major roads. So with the intent of seeing this open up into more areas, it felt redundant. It felt like having the corridors there was not really necessary anymore.
Okay. And either way, this, in any of the zoning districts, it's a special use
Yeah.
everywhere, right?
Yeah.
So if we had a situation where somebody chose a site and it was an area that was unanticipated and it kind of ended up being off the beaten path, it's a special use and there's standards for that.
Yep.
So that could be addressed through that, right? Okay, all right. Because that's, again, when I'm looking at what the original objectives were in the ordinance as it made its way through and was approved, I'm now looking at, well, what has changed, right? So that, and if I understand correctly, it's that the thinking now is that perhaps that was a little too restrictive upfront. But we still, even if we eliminated that entirely, struck it, which I think is what the recommendation is, we still have the special use process as our safety valve, right? Now, with respect to the standalone building, again, for me personally, I would have to hear more. I understand the arguments and the basis for maintaining it, as well as eliminating it. Eliminating it to me would be solely to further the economic development objective, right? And actually, any changes here are solely for economic development. I'm not saying that any of these changes further improve health and safety.
Okay.
One minor point that I wanted to make sure I understood, you were mentioning about the outlots, and I hadn't ever really thought about that, but if in a larger PUD, we had an outlot, which in and of itself was a single building, is that not considered, according to our definition, is that not considered a standalone?
That would be a standalone.
That would, even though it's part of the larger?
Corridor limitation may have,
Okay,
like, for instance, the lot in front of the convention center, 183rd Street was not included as part of those corridors. Someone in theory could build a standalone building there.
okay. As I read in the analysis that was done, the potential for the corridors was to either eliminate that requirement or expand the corridors, right? And if I'm understanding, the recommendation is to eliminate it. Depending on where we end up with this here, there's still the possibility to expand. But I would agree with you that other than a couple of main roads, we'd have to really stretch to try to further define what those corridors would be. Okay, that's all.
Okay, thanks, Commissioner Shaw. Commissioner Manning.
My comment is that, I agree that we want to make it more flexible, for this type of business. But I wouldn't agree, or at least how Commissioner West mentioned, like, adding language for ownership, because then you're back to limiting it, not letting it, try to pigeonhole just a certain area, like where they can go. So maybe, just opening up to, eliminating the corridors, will help, So I think, we're doing baby steps, with this type of, business, and I think it's great. First we started with how Commissioner Shaw was mentioning, what was the first thought when it was drafted, right? So now we're taking up another step, with the comments from the business community, and I think we're going in the right direction. And then I think for other businesses, if they do go into a strip center or what have you, just like restaurants, they do have some communities, they want you to have scrubber units, they're called, or pollution control units, so the whole neighborhood won't smell like fries or burgers. I'm sure there's something, and I'm not a mechanical engineer, but I'm sure there are, some type of, filtering, systems to eliminate the odor outside, you know, if people were, you know, uncomfortable with it, you know, or, you know, so, yeah, those are my comments, but I like the direction that it's becoming more flexible, you know.
Okay. Thanks, Commissioner Manny. Commissioner Vargas.
Yes, actually, I have some concerns too about the co-tenancy, but mine was more towards the foot traffic. When you go by some of these dispensaries, especially the one on Harlem and Worth, when I've driven by afternoon, evening, there's always lines on these standalone locations. So if you put it with other tenants, is that going to impact their businesses if they have a line for the dispensary standing in front of their storefront, blocking off getting into their businesses? Would it put people off for going into their businesses because they see this long line of other people waiting for the dispensaries?
Is there the possibility that it wouldn't necessarily be conditional, and again, I know every one of them is a special use permit, but co-tenancy permitted when a possible line would not obstruct the entry to another business, so that if it was like a side entrance and then around the corner side entrance, something like that?
I mean, I guess it could. I mean, they would have to be then at the end of the strip mall or whatever co-tenancy that they would have. That was one of my concerns. The other one is safety with crime. Has there been any studies to see if there's been any increased crime with these dispensaries, as opposed to, let's say they move into a co-tenancy and they have more crime because of what they're doing, what they're selling? Would that put the other tenants at risk? That's another question I have. I don't know. I haven't done any research on if there's a crime increase with those. Would it be better to keep it in a standalone building, or would you be putting the other tenants at risk?
I can follow up with Chief Walsh and see if he's gotten any new information on that since a year now out. Good question.
Okay.
Okay, thanks.
And for the line side of it, I guess it would be, like you said, addressed as part of the special use. There is access of one of the standards, and we usually take that as both traffic as well as pedestrian. So it usually is reviewed. So that would definitely be something you guys are looking at, as well as when we get special uses that are really unique and can be troublesome, you'll see the long list of conditions that we put on there, so it gives us some teeth to make sure it doesn't, that's usually why it is a special use, right? It could work, but it could have some negative effects, and we really want to dive into it. So that might be one where it's just addressed with the special use rather than maybe a separate clear condition going in. But, no.
So I have one more question here.
Sure, go ahead.
Honestly, I'm not even sure who this is addressed to. It's anyone who might be knowledgeable, or it's just out there. It just struck me when you mentioned about lines. Do we know, or has anybody estimated how long this extreme demand is anticipated to go on for? I remember a long time ago, Krispy Kreme donuts, came to the area, and lines were around buildings, et cetera. I know it's not quite the same thing. Could be related if you really thought about it, but demand died down.
Sure, yeah.
Right? So I guess I'm just tossing it out there.
So the one thing I can chime in is that the Worth dispensary is the one I was thinking of as well. When I was still working at the hospital, I took Harlem most days. So coming home is when I would see it. It would be like between 4:30, 5:30, 6 o'clock. I would say almost every day, and I was driving this for the last year and a half, there was a line outside, usually like right around when people got off work, right? And then if I was coming home later, 6:37, there wouldn't be. Some of that may have also been related to pandemic spacing, because I know they would only let so many people in the lobby, and everybody else had to stand outside. But from everything I understand, sales have been, they kind of skyrocketed up, and then there's been a little bit of a drop off, but not drastically. So, the joke about it being a product that sells itself, I think that if there was a certain level of business being done, we could probably anticipate that being steady.
And a lot of these locations now, like Sunnyside is a big name with they encourage their customers essentially to pre-order online. So, a lot of people are literally walking in with already an order. And so I think now that people are getting trained to do that, maybe some of that might adjust with the lines. I haven't particularly visited the Worth one, but what I know about the Worth one is it's just kind of a small site, or there's some parking issues too.
Well, there had also been an enterprise car rental
Yeah,
next
and
to
they're
it,
not-
so
yeah.
there's not much to look at driving up and down
Exactly.
Harlem.
Yeah.
But they moved out.
Yeah.
And I kind of wondered in the back of my mind, was that because
I think they brought 'em
of the,
out.
oh, did they? Well, and I wasn't sure if it was they need to expand, or
Yeah.
were they driven out by the foot traffic and the smell, but
They were
I mean-
yeah, with the parking, but I know, so that's I know that's the one large organization, I don't know if the smaller ones, but I know that's, might help a little bit with, and people, I think, because of code, have gotten a little more savvy with the apps, and everyone orders everything online now.
Well, so the reasoning behind the question is, this is obviously something that needs to be managed up front, now, but, just the potential for, is this something that is going to settle down and just become another business, right? Or is this sort of business pattern something that we should just anticipate to exist for a while?
But I guess with more licenses too, you start spreading out the demand, right? So
Yeah.
It's probably at its peak now. We might gain some customers, you might lose some in the meantime, but you're starting to
Krispy
spread
Kreme.
out that highest demand.
And same with PF Chang's. You couldn't get in there and then it died down. Just,
The Aldi over here by us, I drove by, there's a line for the Aldi first thing in the morning. Have you guys seen that?
On Wednesdays.
Yeah.
That's when they put out
It's-
all their
They-
stuff.
is that new product day?
Yeah, Wednesday's new product day.
I went through there one morning, there were 25
not-
people deep in line.
Won't say why I don't.
I was like, what's going on at Aldi that I need to
I
get?
didn't know that.
You gotta get your Aldi finds on Wednesdays.
but,
I've driven by Rise, which is the one in Joliet,
Mhm.
so that's outside their mall. It is a standalone building. But that, when it opened up, they were taking people from a mall parking lot and driving them over there because there was so much traffic. And they even designated like line areas that kept it on the mall property. It's nothing like that. Now, that's a bigger building than I think Worth is, so they can have more people inside, more people waiting in a lined area. And when I've last driven past it, I haven't seen anybody out there on the weekends or anything, so.
In Worth?
No, in Joliet,
Oh.
so, but that one's a bigger building,
Oh,
so
okay.
maybe those
They
people
can accommodate
standing
the line
outside
inside.
in Worth are just
Yeah.
accommodated inside, so.
yeah, and looking at the memo from the village manager for the committee of the whole, page 2, it talks about the dispensary owners wanting 25 parking lots, preferably more. And I think some of the commission have already alluded to even what was going on last year, where on social media, you just see lines out the door. It sounds like there's still lines, and Commissioner West has a good point. Maybe it's spacing because of the pandemic. But I do think it might be prudent to reach out to some of these cities that actually have it implemented, but it sounds like Lombard and Joliet are standalone, right? Is there one in Lombard? You said they were proactive on the actual regulations. Is that in a co-tenant? Because I concur with, I think Commissioner Manny and some of the other commissioners. I think it's okay to eliminate the corridor, looking at that inter-office memo. The few buildings that are candidates, you have owners that aren't gonna sell or lease to a cannabis store. So I think opening up's fine, but I do believe that there was enough discussion here from the commissioners regarding some of the concerns, whether it was odor nuisance, a line nuisance, and perhaps a crime nuisance, as Commissioner Vargas mentioned. So in addition to reaching out, I think Kimberly said to the chief, police chief, what other avenues can staff explore to, reach out to an existing co-tenant to just find out, and maybe it's, once you find out information from them, call their neighbor, right? I think that's probably, you'll get the more honest answer on what they have to deal with. Because you want to increase business, but you also don't want to hurt a business in that's already been established there or whatnot. If somebody's moving in and they know the odor and stuff like that, that's different. But I think there's a potential if somebody has been there for 5 years and they come in, and then, like the enterprise rental, they're leaving, right? So, but that's all I have. I think I, like Commissioner Shaw, I don't know enough about that. Sounds like Commissioner West, from her times with the VA, does have a pretty good beat on that. So I think those are, we gotta ask the right people the right questions just to get some more information to make the right decision on that second, that second item, 7? No, 8. You know, that it's gotta be in a standalone building, no co-tenancy. I think some more information is needed before that, before a decision is made on that.
I think you stated it in a good way about, and maybe I wasn't clear on mine as well, that I'm leaning towards that removing the corridor requirements, is a good idea. I don't know just yet about the standalone, and I guess I'm gonna assume that those would be, we would consider those as separate items, potentially. And I think when we get to that, I think that even if we recommended that the board remove the corridor requirements, but we don't recommend changing the standalone, over time, everyone's gonna learn a little bit more. We can always revisit that one, and, as Commissioner Manning said, tweak it a little bit more, right?
Okay, with that, is there any more comments? If not, I guess staff, if you are able to draft an ordinance reflecting some of these amendments available for the public hearing at the August 5th, 2021 regularly scheduled Plan Commission meeting. And if you can reach out to some of these public entities and find out some more information on some of the questions the commission had, that would be appreciated. It could give us further clarity.
Sure, we'll do that. I think Kimberly already sent an email to the chief, so
Okay.
we're already on it.
Okay, excellent. In real time. Nicely done. With that, we will move to our final and fourth item. Item 4 is a workshop to consider a proposed text amendment to Section 9, the sign regulations of the Tinley Park zoning ordinance. Proposed changes would allow a second signed accessory to an approved drive-through lane. Additionally, some clarifications and minor adjustments are proposed for simpler regulation and enforcement of the code. Staff, if you can make your presentation at this time.
Yeah, thanks, Chairman. So this is some changes to the sign regulations. So I think 3 of you were probably here, Manny, Shaw, and Gray. In 2017, there was a pretty large overhaul. Predated me a little bit, but I came in right when it was happening, so I saw the new code as well as the staff reports. And I think there's a lot of time spent on this with ZBA, Plan Commission, Village Board, looking at the different options, the different regulations here. With any new code, and we say this all the time when we make some tweaks, it's difficult sometimes to anticipate all the different potential outcomes and the different proposals. So you kind of do the best you can to anticipate those, but then once you use it in real time, sometimes you start going, okay, that doesn't quite work, maybe that's a little too far. And so when we start seeing variations kind of reoccurring, when we start seeing requests reoccurring, either that come before you guys or some may not, you guys may never see it, but we deal with it on maybe a permit side where we go, you can't quite do that, sorry, even though it doesn't quite make sense. So sometimes we have to be, apologize for the code and be like, okay, well, you can either meet the code or go through a variance process, but maybe for all intents and purposes, that doesn't work. So with any new code, we kind of like to revisit it once in a while. The main thing driving this, and it's come before you guys a couple times within the last year or so, with Starbucks as well as Do Right Donuts, was a preview menu board allowance. So the code's really written to kind of allow one drive-through sign out there It's become a little bit of industry standard to have a preview menu board as well. And there's a list there on your screen of all the most recent ones, like I was able to find, that were approved out there. So this, we know we have at least a few upcoming, and that's another, the Starbucks that was on LaGrange, that's going into the MB Financial. Popeyes has a permit, and that includes this, and then there's a Smoothie King coming as well. All have shown a need or desire for a preview menu board. So that was really our recommendation, was to add that into the code first, and to allow one additional sign that's accessory to a drive-through lane. And we added kind of an approved drive-through lane, so it's clear any drive-through lane has to go through Plan Commission and site plan approval. Maximum 15 square feet, and the full-size one's allowed to be up to 35 square feet for the full kind of menu board. So a smaller sign, and then maximum 7 feet in height, which is the same as the menu board. All of the previously approved variations fit within that. So most of them are all actually below 15 square feet. There was one that was 12 and one that was like 12 and some change. So I like round numbers, so I picked 15, just to kind of give it a little round, easier to say, give a little flexibility in there. And then the 7-foot height is really to keep it in line with the same height limit as the other sign. Often they're a little bit shorter though. So that's our first open item, is just to review that change. That really adds that into the code. And like I said, with any variation that's reoccurring, you're either going, do we start saying no to these, or do we change the code if it's something everybody feels, yeah, there's no unique hardship, but it's just kind of normal. So once we're in the code, we've decided there's a few tweaks, kind of cleanups we needed to do. A few of those, so 3 of the ones that we're proposing are what I'll kind of call like over-regulation, things that are regulated by other aspects of the sign code, but don't really accomplish very much, and they've occasionally gotten in the way with a few signs that I think looked fine, but there's one little aspect like these that maybe either hold it up or they have to change their whole sign. And so that's the maximum wall sign height. And so we have a maximum square footage allowance for a tenant based on their lineal footage of frontage. And that has a maximum of 120 square feet. So even if it's pretty massive tenant space, it's 120. So that's one that's kind of regulated by other aspects of the code with that maximum size. If they wanted to do one very large word, or they wanted to do 2 lines of words, it's really, or it's one image and some words, or just one large image, we kind of, there really wasn't too much of a point to that. Sometimes you would maybe want a bigger word, it's more visible from farther away. So that also kind of goes with that maximum wall sign letter height. So there's a maximum letter height, but if you have the allowable signage space, we kind of figure that kind of regulates the intent of the sign to make it look good. The third one that's kind of under that over-regulation is the maximum signs, maximum lines of lettering, which is limited to 2 lines of lettering. So often I believe the point behind that was to really prevent, I guess, somebody from putting a paragraph up as a sign that really wouldn't be visible or readable to anyone. In reality, that's never been proposed. I think that's been one where we have existing signs and we've had a few proposed signs. You could have 3 words, like the Whistle Bar and Grill or the Whistle Bar, and they could be stacked on top of each other, and that technically wouldn't meet that code. So we've had a few of those. The Marriott's another one, or the Fairfield Inn by Marriott you know, that technically doesn't need it, and there's an existing sign in town that doesn't really raise any red flags off the bat. So we do have regulations, again, the overall size, requirements to be set in a foot from the sides of the wall, and things like that. Can't cover up architectural elements that really kind of allow those signs to still look good, be readable. And the reality is, most tenants want their signs to be readable. So they're looking at those, what are the letter heights? Can somebody see this? But some of that readability aspect goes back to how far it is from the street or where the customer's at anyways. Some of the other sign clarifications, and especially with kind of loosening up some of those ones we just talked about, was to really clarify and strengthen the requirements with the architectural elements. So there's a few examples of kind of pillars or other architectural elements. You might get like keystones in the building that you don't really want signage to cover up. Usually especially multi-tenant centers are kind of designed with, here's where you're gonna put your signs. And sometimes that's the controlling aspect of how big the sign is, not the maximum square footage. So we kind of wanted to strengthen that and really make it a requirement. So that way, if somebody's covering up architectural elements, they have an option. They can go before you guys and ask for a variance on it. But we'd rather have the teeth to say, and these are examples of multi-tenant buildings that if you can picture a really historic building somewhere in downtown or something that you could really mess up the look of a nice building with a gaudy sign, that's also something we're looking to kind of make sure we have some teeth to say no. And if they want the option, they can go before you guys. Obviously, signage regulations are a little tough because they really are about aesthetics at the end of the day. The other ones, just clarifying a distance of any kind of ground signs from walkways, drive aisles, parking stalls, just a safety mechanism. Have a couple feet between a car door and a sign at a minimum. We've done 2 feet, and that's what we proposed in the code, and that's kind of what we pushed for and never really received any pushback on it, but we kind of want to have that in the code. Again, have some teeth to it. Clarifying the total square footage of temporary sign calculation, so it kind of lays out, it seems like the intent behind it was to, if you have multiple temporary signs, you add up all the square footages of a single face, but then it just kind of stops short of saying add those together. So we're just kind of clarifying that. And then lastly is clarifying the EMC message change timing. So in 2 different parts of the code, one says 2 seconds, one says 8 seconds, and that's the switching of a message. We erred kind of on the side of being a little more flexible with 2 seconds over the 8 seconds. The 2 to 3 seconds is what the sign, I forget the official name of them, but the National Sign Organization kind of recommends 2 to 3 seconds. And 2 seconds might seem a little quick if you're thinking of a longer message, but it's also 8 seconds would be really long if you think of a smaller one that has to say like 50% off sale today, and it can only get a couple words out at a time. That one you wouldn't be able to get a message across quick enough. So 2 seconds is enough for us to make sure it's not a motion display, so you don't have full motion, kind of an objectable measure there. So we erred on the side of being actually a little more liberal out of the two, but we believe there's the 2 seconds is enough to stop anything. So those are just kind of some of the minor code clarifications we wanted to get at while we're already touching the sign code. So that's it for me. Let me know if you guys have any questions.
Okay, thanks, Dan. At this time, I'll ask the commissioners to comment or discuss anything in staff's report, starting with Commissioner Vargas.
One question I had, or concern really, was about if you take away the wording on the maximum sign, maximum wall sign height. I understand what you're saying about your reasons why, but can there be something maybe instead of that you had a maximum, they could only use a maximum square footage of the sign? Could you do something
Yes,
like
right.
that?
And we already have that. So, like, if a tenant has 50 feet of frontage, they're only allowed 50 square feet of signage.
But they could use that whole 50 feet then if you take out eliminating the maximum height, correct?
Yes, yeah, I mean, so you have 50 square feet of maximum signage. It can't touch any of the architectural elements. It's gotta be a foot in from the sides. But they have up to 50 square feet if they can make all those other aspects work.
Okay.
And that's where kind of the sign height was odd, since you could have maybe a logo or something that's a little taller than it is wide, that fits within a space, and nothing looks wrong with it, but it's just the design of the sign. Or you have word stack, it gets a little taller than it does wide, but you can't have a tall sign. And I guess with that, we've varied that with all of our recent sign variances, so like Burlington, the grocer, Floor and Decor, Menards has had variances, Aldi had a variance from that. So I think all those signs have had variances from that. And I think the other aspects of control, what that was trying to accomplish, still pretty well.
That's it.
Okay, thank you. Commissioner Manny?
You know, Dan, you bring up Aldi. Don't you remember how their original sign was like monstrous? So I think taking away the maximum would be, you get stuff like that. Like,
Well, so that went over the maximum square footage.
well, right, but then we shrunk it down. We give and take, and look better proportionally. But if you could eliminate in a maximum, you're gonna get, I think signs are, gonna be this big, that big, what'll look.
So we're not taking away the maximum size for it, or the maximum overall, so you'd still, I think Aldi had like 100 feet of frontage, so they'd still only be allowed 100 square foot sign. So that one went well over it, so I think that one would still require a variance
Right.
if they wanted to. But the sign height aspect of it doesn't really limit that overall size of the sign,
Well, right,
so we're still keeping those.
It's just I'm afraid that we'll get, if you look at the strip center signs that are,
Yeah.
beep, 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 and then it'll just look goofy,
Yeah. We still say that they have to be somewhat aligned with the neighbor, right? Like
Yeah,
a
so we have a
center,
center line. that
Right,
has
right,
to
But
stay.
you still could have someone who has maybe slightly.
Yeah, so it won't look so bad, like currently I'm working on, a city in Michigan that, their regulations like, okay, the front, the elevation, whatever your square footage of your storefront elevation, your sign could be 10% of that square footage. But it can't be, can't be bigger than 300 square feet. Like they stop at 200, but, so it's kind of like, yeah, that's how you can measure, okay, bring it in, So, but those are my comments, we definitely don't want to have like the, great varying degree of signages, depending on, if they're renting 2 spaces or 1, and, it'll just start to, look weird.
Okay, thanks, Commissioner Manny. Commissioner Shaw?
Yeah, a couple of points. I went through all the text amendments that you proposed in there, and I just want to say I didn't see anything in there that I disagreed with. Even the minor ones, they just made sense. And looking back on it now, I do agree with the recommendation on eliminating the maximum letter and overall height for the reasons you stated, that, sure, somebody, if they had the vertical clearance, they could, have a 1 foot wide, by, 100 foot tall, letter I, if that's their business. But logically, I think just managing square footage as opposed to dictating overall height and letter height makes sense. I think in the end, we're still going to achieve the same objective that we're going for without, as you said, over-regulating one point I'd like, and in particular, I like what you came up with, and the examples you had of not interfering with architectural features. I honestly don't recall if that was something that we talked about even, or if it just, wasn't in there. But you have some really great examples in the report there, and I completely agree with that. I just want to make sure that I'm understanding this for the purposes of the ordinance or of the regulation. Is the top of the building, if you go back to the Menards and the Dick's, is the top of the building considered an architectural feature? Meaning, if they weren't otherwise exceeding the limits, could the sign extend beyond the top of the building?
So you can't, so we have there's a separate regulation that says you can't go over the roof line.
Okay.
But I think even if there's like a cornice or like kind of look at the Brookhaven, they have that.
That's an architectural feature,
That's
clearly.
an architectural feature.
Menards and Dick's, not as obvious, but we do, the ordinance does talk about margins,
Yes.
right?
Yep.
Right. I'm good. It looks good to me.
I just want, while we're still conversing about that, like, looking back at those pictures, even Whole Foods, the little curly Q on the O. So because it's below that little architectural feature, that would be within that 1 foot. Is that how that reads?
That one would be unique because I'd probably be before you guys for a variance anyways on size.
Yeah.
And I think I would probably, so that's in Orland Park, but if it was in Tinley, it probably would have had it been below like on the actual facade.
Right, that's how I understood it to be. Like, to Ken's point about, you can have an eye that's narrow, that's huge, up until, the constraints of the roof of the building and then your sides. But if it's narrow, your sides won't be an issue. You just don't want it overtopping. Even the Dick's basketball, or whatever that is, as an apostrophe, looks like it's a little bit above, their sign dimensions. But the way ours would read, that would have to be a foot below at least, right?
And that's, it'll be like, so if you get a shopping center, sometimes you'll get a sign plan with that. And in those, it might make sense for like letter heights and stuff, because you keep it consistent across one shopping center. But we have some shopping centers that, and if you look at the new one with Brixmore, those are being developed, the facade's almost being developed with anticipation of where signs will go. And if a space is 3 or if it's 2, it all fits within those spaces. But if you look across the street where Aldi is, it's actually a pretty thin band there. So some of it's dictated by how the shopping center is designed. But if we get some requests like that, we can maybe make it tailored to the specific center rather than something village-wide.
Okay.
Because the letter heights, I think that even applies to like our large industrial buildings off of I-80. That you wouldn't be able to see those signs from I-80 if we didn't grant variances for them, because they're all over those letter heights and maximum sign heights. So.
Okay, thanks, Dan. Commissioner Gaskell, any
No
comments?
comments.
Okay, Commissioner West.
No additional comments on this.
Commissioner Lushuto?
Nothing to add.
Okay. I don't want to reiterate stuff that we've already said. I do just want to mention that we've seen these preview menu boards come across the Plan Commission the last few months. It's become redundant looking at them, so I really thank staff for being on this and changing with the times so that we don't have to look at everything that is acceptable, and as Dan mentioned, it fits in that criteria of that 15 square feet. So I like that a lot. I echo a lot of the comments that were said by some of the commission here today. As long as those signs don't interfere with architectural elements, I don't have a problem with the elimination of the maximum wall sign height. But I will mention to Commissioner Manny's point, you probably do want to make sure that things are uniform and not kind of all over the place. But with that said, I think this is a good idea, rather than keep on granting variances every time we have the same thing come across. So I think it's a good tweak.
I was saving myself time, to be honest. Writing one staff report over 3 more was my preference.
Okay, so you can, if staff can please draft their amendments for review for the public hearing on August 5th, 2021, for the Plan Commission meeting, we'll take a look at it then. So with that, we'll move on to the good of the order. Staff, do you have anything to say about the good of the order?
Just really quick for new commissioners, everybody here isn't all that new since Ken's been here and Jennifer came from zoning board, but always feel free to reach out to us if you have questions. Lori's kind of the go-to contact between you guys, but feel free to reach out to me, Kimberly. If you guys ever have questions on these, I think we're thinking of maybe doing some like zoning board training at some point in the future too, or plan commission zoning board training. I know the APA Illinois does that, so we're kind of feeling them out, see what timing and stuff we could do there. I think sometimes it's better to hear, you get a broader perspective rather than staff telling you what to do. So look into some of that. The Pete's Fresh Market is going to Village Board on July 20th for approval, and that's at the Public Safety Building / Firehouse near the downtown. So they're doing the Village Board meeting remotely from the Village Hall. So I think bringing the meeting to the public rather than the public coming to them. So just want to note that for anyone watching. I did reach out to the residents that were at the public hearing to let them know the date and the location.
It's during the auto show on Oak Park.
Yes, during the auto
yeah.
show, so they'll have some clarity in terms of parking and access and stuff online as well for that.
Okay.
So, the Scannell Industrial Project that was approved by the Village Board, and then the Boulevard is working on their move-ins, so they're inching pretty close to that and having people move into the second floor and work their way up the floors there. But
Excellent.
exciting to see people maybe start moving in there, and hopefully soon after that, commercial tenants. So it's a nice to see at least phase one of that
Right.
wrapping up now.
Absolutely.
Next meeting is August 5th, and we have a pretty full agenda. So let us know if you can't make it early.
Okay. Excellent. Excellent, Dan. With that, may I have a motion? Oh, is there any public comment? There's no public here, so seeing none, we'll move on to adjourn the meeting. May I have a motion?
Mr. Chairman,
Yeah.
if I could, I just.
Go ahead. Sure.
I wanted to make a real quick statement here. First of all, happy to be back. Missed you guys. I just wanted, I don't recall whether this was brought up at another point, so if I'm repeating what's already been discussed, I'm going to do it anyway. Recently, the village lost a long-term servant, Ed Matouche. He was chairman of the Plan Commission. I succeeded him. We both joined, and Eddie, I think you were part of that original 2016 group there. And it felt kind of weird sitting back in this seat because Ed sat there when I first joined Plan Commission. So it was a bit of a deja vu. And I just want to point out, Ed's name is on the plaque outside. He was a longtime village trustee as well. And I will just say, for my part, I really appreciated Ed. I thought he was a great guy. I didn't know him very well or very long, but I really sincerely respected him as a public servant and as chairman of the Plan Commission in particular. When I took over as chairman, I really learned a lot from him, just in his style, and tried my best to continue that. So I'd just like to make sure that he was acknowledged for the record there. Thank you.
I appreciate those words, Ken. That's nicely said. With that, may I have a motion to close the Plan Commission meeting?
So moved.
Second?
Okay, motion made by Commissioner West, seconded by Commissioner Shaw. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Okay, motion is carried. And it's about 9:25, so.